Hey everyone, so imagine this. A tiny, careless mistake happens, but then it sets off this wild, unpredictable chain reaction that ends in a total catastrophe. The law then has a really tough question to answer. Where exactly do we draw the line on who's responsible? Today, we're going to dig into that very line using the incredible story of a very famous burning harbor. And that's really the heart of the problem, isn't it? When one little act of negligence just snowballs into something massive, something no one could have predicted, is it actually fair to make the person who made that first tiny mistake pay for everything that follows? It's a huge question of fairness, and it's a real puzzle that the courts have been trying to solve for a long, long time. You can think of it like setting off a huge line of dominoes. One little push can kick off a long, complicated chain reaction. And for the law, that creates a massive headache. If you're the one who pushed that first domino, are you responsible for the very last one that falls, no matter how far away it is or how weird the chain reaction was? To figure that out, we need to get a handle on two key legal ideas. Okay, so to solve this whole domino problem, the law uses two main tools. First up, you've got causation. That's pretty straightforward, right? It's the link. Did your action actually cause the final result? It's a simple yes or no. But the second idea, remoteness, that's where things get really tricky. Remoteness asks, hey, was that final domino so bizarre, so far-fetched that it's just not fair anymore to blame the person who started it all? You could almost call it the legal system's reality check. So, what was the law's first crack at this problem? Well, they started with a rule that was, let's just say, super simple but also incredibly harsh. And it could lead to some results that were, frankly, pretty shocking. Yeah, the original rule was called the direct consequence test. And it was simple. If your action directly led to something happening, you were on the hook for it. Period. It didn't matter if the outcome was a 1 in a million freak accident. If you started that domino chain, you paid for the whole thing, wherever it ended. You can probably see how that could get pretty unfair, pretty fast. Which brings us to a case that literally changed everything. Okay, so let's head to Sydney Harbor, Australia, back in 1961. This is where we get a landmark case involving a ship, famously called the Wagon Mound. This single case would completely tear up the old rulebook and rewrite the law on remoteness and who's responsible. All right, let's just walk through exactly what went down. First, workers on the wagon mound carelessly let a huge amount of furnace oil just spill right into the harbor. Next, this thick, gooey oil slick starts to spread all across the water, and it reaches a nearby dock, a wharf, where some other guys are doing welding repairs. Then, sparks from their welding work fall onto some floating cotton debris, and that debris catches fire. And then, the final crucial step, the fire from the debris spreads to the oil slick itself, creating a massive inferno that just torches the entire wharf. A total disaster, all from one simple spill. So the wharf owners, obviously, they sued the ship owners. But here's where it gets really interesting. During the trial, a truly critical fact comes out. Based on the scientific knowledge at that time, the court found that it was not reasonably foreseeable that this specific type of oil could catch fire while floating on water. Everyone thought it was basically impossible. A total freak event. And that one little detail, it was about to change legal history forever. Because of that one crucial fact, the court basically said, you know what? This old rule is out. It's just not fair to hold someone liable for a consequence that was completely and utterly unpredictable. And right then and there, they threw out the old rule and created a brand new test to take its place. And wow, what a change this was. It was a fundamental shift in thinking. The law moved from the old, blunt, direct consequence test to the new, more nuanced foreseeability test. The question was no longer just, did your action cause it? The new question became, could a reasonable person have foreseen that this type of harm might happen? It's a much fairer standard, right? It asks us to think about the reasonable consequences of our actions, not to be responsible for every freak accident in the universe. And so the final ruling came down. The ship's owners were definitely responsible for the oil spill itself. They had to pay to clean up that mess. But were they responsible for the fire that destroyed the wharf? Nope, they were not liable for that. Why? Because the fire damage was not a foreseeable consequence of spilling the oil. In the language of the law, the damage was simply too remote. But hold on, because in law, it's never quite that simple, is it? Just when you think we have a nice, neat, new rule about foreseeability, the law has to make room for a very old, very important principle. And this is a really fascinating twist in the story. This is one of the most famous phrases in law. You take your victim as you find them. It's the core of what's called the eggshell skull rule. What it basically means is you can't use someone's hidden weakness or their secret vulnerability as an excuse. If you carelessly injure someone, you are responsible for the actual damage you caused to them, not the damage you might have caused to a perfectly healthy, strong person. Okay, so how does this fit in with our new foreseeability test? Let's break it down. First, the type of harm still has to be foreseeable. For instance, if you carelessly knock someone over, a sprained ankle or a broken bone is a foreseeable type of harm. But, and this is the key part, the full extent of that harm does not need to be foreseeable. So if that person you knocked over has a rare bone condition and what should have been a simple fracture turns into a lifelong disability, well, that's on you. You're liable for the full, unexpectedly severe result. So you can really think of these two rules as working together like a team. The foreseeability test is like a gatekeeper. It asks that first big question: was this kind of harm predictable at all? If the answer is yes, then the gate swings open. But once you're through that gate, the eggshell skull rule takes over. It says, okay, you're in. Now you are responsible for the entire journey, no matter how surprisingly bad the damage turns out to be for this particular person. And that leaves us with the really big question, right? This whole system is trying to balance two different ideas of what's fair. On one hand, fairness to the person who made the mistake by not making them pay for truly bizarre, unpredictable accidents. But on the other hand, fairness to the victim, especially a vulnerable one, by making sure they're covered for all the harm they actually suffered. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think? Has the law actually struck the right balance? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for digging into this with me.